In the Valley of Violence, 2016, the desert doesn't care about you. That's the first thing you need to understand about this story. The desert wide, burning in different stretches from horizon to horizon like a warning nobody bothered to read. And through it walks a man, alone, quiet, moving like someone who has already made peace with the worst version of every day. His name is Paul, no last name offered, no history volunteered. Just a man in worn-out clothes with a battered rifle, a bedroll, and a dog trotting loyally beside him like a shadow that chose him on purpose. The dog's name is Abby, a brindle mutt with soft eyes and a calm that somehow mirrors her owner. And if you're watching carefully, if you're paying the kind of attention that this story demands, you already sense something important. Abby is not just a dog to Paul. She is the only living thing in this world that he appears to love without reservation, without condition, without complication. That matters. Hold on to that. Paul is heading to Mexico. He doesn't say why. He doesn't explain himself to anyone, not to the winds, not to the vultures circling lazily overhead, and certainly not to the two bandits who ride up on him from the east just as the sun starts its punishing afternoon climb. These men are ragged, desperate, and stupid in that particular way that desperate men often are. They size Paul up. They see the rifle. They see the dog. They see a lone traveler who looks like easy prey. One of them makes a move. Paul breaks the man's wrist without blinking. Not quickly, not frantically, with a kind of casual, terrible efficiency that stops everything cold, the birds, the wind, the breathing of the second bandit. Paul looks at them the way you look at a problem you've already solved, and hands the injured man back to his companion like he's returning something borrowed. He tells them, in a voice that carries no heat whatsoever, to ride away. They ride away. This is your first look at what Paul really is. But the movie and this story is smart enough not to tell you. It just shows you. A man who breaks a wrist, the way other men shake hands, is a man with a very specific past. And that past is going to matter before this is all over. The road eventually delivers Paul and Abby to the edge of a small, half-dead desert town called Denton. Denton looks like ambition that gave up. A cluster of wooden buildings baking in the heat, a saloon that sounds emptier than it looks, and a main street that carries the distinct feeling of a place where things go wrong quietly, and nobody writes it down. Paul only wants two things from Denton: water for Abby, a meal for himself, and to be gone by morning. 3 things. He only wants 3 things. And even that, it turns out, is too much to ask. He walks into the saloon. The bartender, named Ernest, is the kind of man who has survived in a place like this by reading rooms fast. He reads Paul and relaxes slightly. He offers a room, a meal, water for the dog. Paul accepts. Simple transaction. Clean edges. Then, the door swings open. Gilly. Remember that name too. Gilly is young, loud, and walking through Denton like he owns the deed to every square inch of it. He has a group of friends, 4 men who drift behind him like debris around a drain. They're the kind of men whose entire identity is borrowed from whoever the most dangerous person in the room is, and Gilly has decided that's him. He swaggers over to Paul, makes comments, tries angles. Paul ignores him the way you ignore a fire that hasn't reached you yet, aware of it, not alarmed by it. Here is something the movie understands about violence that most stories get wrong. The worst confrontations are rarely started by the most violent people. They're started by people who have never truly experienced violence and therefore cannot accurately estimate its cost. Gilly has never experienced violence. Not really. His father, Clyde, runs Denton, owns most of it. His last name and his father's money have insulated him from consequence his entire life. He has never had to pay a real price for anything, and that specific poisonous form of protection is what makes him dangerous in this particular way. Not because he is strong, but because he has been raised to believe the rules don't apply to him. Paul finishes his meal, keeps his head down, takes Abby upstairs to the room, but Gilly follows. Not because he needs something, not because Paul has wronged him, but because Gilly cannot stand the idea of a stranger passing through his town and not acknowledging his authority over it. He pushes into the room. His men fill the doorway. He wants Paul's rifle, a beautiful weapon, old and clearly cared for. He wants it the way small men always want things, because someone else has it. Paul says no. Gilly's eyes change. The thing about men like Gilly is that no is not just a word to them. It's an insult to their entire worldview. And so what follows is not quite a fight, it's more like a demonstration. Paul handles all 4 of Gilly's men with the same blank, operational calm he showed the bandits on the road. No showboating, no fury. Just clean, painful resolution of a problem he didn't create and didn't want. Gilly watches every one of his friends hit the floor. And then, most importantly, Paul lets him leave. He lets him leave alive, unhurt, and humiliated. And if you understand anything about men like Gilly, you understand that this is not mercy. This is a fuse being lit. Paul doesn't know that yet. Abby does, though. She watches the door long after Gilly has gone, and she doesn't stop watching. Drop a comment right now. Where are you watching this from? And what time is it? Late night viewers, and the ones eating snacks at 2 p.m. I see you. Tell me below. Morning comes to Denton the way. Mornings come to places like that, sudden and without apology. Paul is packed and ready. Abby is fed. He is already thinking about the road ahead, about Mexico, about whatever it is that waits for him on the other side of that border. He is, for this one brief moment, clean of Denton and everything in it. Gilly finds him at the edge of town. He has his men new ones, or the same ones recovered, and now angrier for it. He has Tubby, the local lawman who wears a badge the way some men wear a costume, and he has his father's authority riding invisibly behind everything he does, like a second shadow. He tells Paul he's not welcome to leave. There's a fine, he says, for the trouble Paul caused last night. The logic is circular and deliberately so. Gilly provoked the fight, but Paul threw the punches, and in Denton, the difference between those 2 facts belongs entirely to whoever has the most power. Paul could fight again. He is clearly capable of it. Instead, he pays. He pays the fine, accepts the humiliation, and turns to walk away. Because Paul is a man who understands something most action heroes don't, that some fights are won by surviving them, not by winning them. He has somewhere to go. He has Abby. The math is simple. But Gilly isn't done. This is the part of the story where the movie asks you a question it doesn't answer directly. What do you do when you've already taken a man's dignity, and it's still not enough? When the act of someone walking away from you in peace feels like another insult? Gilly's answer is to take Abby. Not in a dramatic swoop. Not even with obvious cruelty at first. He tells one of his men to grab the dog. There are some laughs. There is some jeering. Paul turns around slowly. And in his eyes, and this is where the performance does something extraordinary, you see a man doing a very specific kind of calculation. Not of anger, of consequence. Of what it will cost to do what he is about to do versus what it will cost to walk away and come back. He chooses to walk back, for now. He tells Gilly quietly, the way only men who have done genuinely terrible things speak, that the dog comes with him, that this is a line. He doesn't beg. He doesn't threaten with flourish. He simply states a fact, the way you state facts that matter. Gilly laughs. And something inside Paul goes very, very still. The fight that follows is not clean. It's not elegant. Paul is one man against several, and even with his skill, the numbers eventually matter. Tubby the marshal gets involved. They drag Paul down. They beat him. They leave him bleeding in the dirt at the edge of Denton like a warning posted on a fence. And they take Abby back with them. Paul lies there, spits blood, looks at the sky, and for a long moment, it seems like maybe this is just going to be a story about a man who got beaten up in a small town and limped south to Mexico with a lesson learned and a bruised ego. Then he hears Abby bark once from somewhere in the town behind him. Just once. Familiar, clear. He closes his eyes, and that stillness inside him becomes something else entirely. Here's something worth understanding, because it matters to the rest of this story, and it matters to real life too. Violence has a grammar. Most people never learn it because they never have to. But men who have spent time in places where violence is the primary language, soldiers, mercenaries, men who have operated in the spaces between law and consequence, those men know that the most dangerous moment in any confrontation is not the first strike. It's the moment when someone decides, quietly and with full awareness, that they are going to see something through to the end regardless of cost. That decision looks like calm. That decision looks like Paul, lying in the dirt, listening to his dog bark once. He gets up. He walks back into Denton. Not running, Walking, he goes to the saloon, finds Ernest, who is scared but not entirely without conscience. Ernest tells him what happened, confirms what Paul already knows. And in the background, through the walls of Denton, comes information that hits Paul like a blade through glass. Abby is gone. Not taken back to the stable. Not locked up somewhere. Gone. Gilly's men, either by order or by cruelty that Gilly permitted with silence, have killed her. They killed his dog. The only thing in Paul's world that was soft. The only thing he permitted himself to love without armor. Ernest watches Paul's face and sees something that scares him more than anything Gilly has ever done. Not rage. Not tears. Something far quieter than either. Understanding, Paul turns around, walks back outside, looks down Denton's main street. Somewhere in this town, Gilly is laughing. Somewhere, Clyde, the father, the patriarch, the man who made Gilly what he is counting money, or making plans, or doing whatever men like that do when they think they own a piece of the world. None of them understand yet what Paul has just become. He walks to the edge of town, sits with Abby's body, and stays there until the light changes. There's a priest. His name is Mason, and he drifts through this story like a man who has been trying for years to leave and keeps finding reasons or failing to find enough reasons to go. He is not a good priest in the sense of being holy. He is a good priest in the sense of being honest about what he is and what this world is. He finds Paul at the edge of town and doesn't pretend not to see what he sees. He offers to help bury Abby. Paul doesn't say much, but he lets Mason help. And it's Mason who, slowly, pieces together who Paul actually is. Because Paul is not just a wandering drifter with good reflexes. The clues are there for someone paying attention: the rifle, the way he moved against 4 men, the complete absence of fear even when bleeding in the dirt. Mason asks a question carefully, sideways, the way you approach something true when you're not sure you want the answer confirmed. Paul doesn't confirm it, but he doesn't deny it either. What we learn through implication, through Mason's changing expression, through the way Ernest the bartender seems increasingly like a man who wishes he ran his saloon somewhere else, is that Paul has a past that would terrify anyone who knew the details. He is not simply capable of violence. He is someone for whom violence was once a profession, a language, an identity he has been walking away from. Mexico was supposed to be the final distance between who he was and who he might still become. Denton has closed that distance entirely. Gilly doesn't know this. His father doesn't know this. Tubby the marshal certainly doesn't know this. They know what they saw, a lone traveler who could fight. They don't know that what they've done is the equivalent of lighting a match inside an armory. Now Paul starts to plan. This is not a man who acts from rage. This is a man who acts from decision. And the decision is this: everyone who had a hand in what happened to Abby is going to answer for it. Not loudly, not dramatically, one at a time, with patience, in the specific way that only someone who knows what he's doing can manage. He goes to find the man who actually killed her. He doesn't ask Ernest for the name. He doesn't need to. Small towns have small silences, and silences have shapes, and Paul has spent enough time among people to know how to read the shapes. He knows who. He knows where. His name is Lola. He's one of Gilly's, a particularly dim and cruel member of that particular orbit, the kind of man who does ugly things because ugliness has always been permitted in his direction. Paul tracks him down with no ceremony. The confrontation is brief and final, and when it's over, Lola is not going to be a problem for anyone anymore. One down. Word travels fast in a small town. Even when Paul is trying to be quiet about it, Gilly hears, Clyde hears, and here is where the story introduces its most interesting dynamic: Clyde's reaction. Clyde is not a fool. He has built something in this desert town. He has accumulated power and money and influence through a combination of ruthlessness and strategic wisdom. He can read situations, and he reads this one clearly. A man who was beaten, robbed, and had his dog killed should be gone. The fact that he's still here means something. The fact that Lola is now dead means something more. He tells Gilly to fix it. Gilly sends men. Paul takes them apart. Clyde begins to understand that he has inherited a problem that his son created from nothing, from pure, petty cruelty, and that this problem has no clean solution anymore. He goes to see Paul himself. There is a conversation. Clyde offers money, compensation, safe passage, the kind of deal that powerful men offer when they begin to calculate that the cost of conflict exceeds the cost of concession. Paul listens. And then Paul declines. Not because he can't use the money. Not because the passage doesn't make sense. Not because he is posturing or performing grief for an audience. But because money is not what this is about, and Paul is incapable of pretending otherwise. He has been stripped of too much already to perform emotions he does not feel or suppress ones he does. The moment Abby died, this stopped being about anything that money can fix. This is about something older and simpler and more honest than economics. This is about the fact that the world has a grammar, and the grammar says there are actions that require responses, and no amount of paper can translate between those two things. Clyde goes home. He tells Gilly what Paul said, and for the first time, Gilly looks genuinely afraid. Not of Paul, specifically not yet, but of the shape of what's coming, now that it's been made undeniable. He asks his father, "What do we do?" Clyde thinks for a long time. Then he says, "Everything we have." Tubby the Marshal is not a villain in the traditional sense. He is something more familiar and more troubling, a man of authority who has made so many small compromises that he can no longer locate the place where his integrity used to live. He works for Clyde. Has always worked for Clyde. The badge is real. The obligation behind it, to anything other than the Clyde family's interests, has long since been negotiated away. But Tubby is also not entirely without something resembling a conscience. He finds Paul in the evening, not to threaten him, but to warn him, tells him the odds. 5 men, fully armed, Clyde's blessing. Paul is one man with a rifle and a dead dog and a reason. Paul nods. Tubby waits for Paul to change course. Paul doesn't change course. Tubby goes home and sits in his office for a long time, looking at his badge, thinking about the kind of man he had once intended to be when the world still seemed large enough for intentions to matter. He makes a decision that costs him something. What it costs him, and what he does with whatever is left of his conscience, will matter before this night is over. Here's the moment I'm going to stop and say something directly to you. 99 out of 100 people who watch a story like this all the way to this point, who feel what this story is actually doing, click away without ever pressing subscribe. You just watched a man lose the only soft thing in his world. You felt that. Maybe you even sat up a little when Gilly's men walked toward that dog. That's real. That's this channel doing what it's supposed to do. It costs you nothing. Zero. Not a dollar. Not a minute of your day. This isn't about a button. It's about being the kind of person who shows up for stories that actually mean something, who doesn't let the good ones pass without leaving a mark. That's who this channel is built for. You're already here. Stay. The night settles over Denton like a held breath. Paul moves through it with the patience of someone who has waited for darkness many times before, who knows its rhythms, its coverages, the specific silence that means safety, and the specific silence that means someone is also waiting. He has positioned himself with care. The rifle is loaded. He knows the town's geography now, every doorway, every angle, every patch of shadow that will give, and every patch that will betray. He has done this kind of accounting before, in places he has tried very hard to forget, but the body remembers, the hands remember, the eyes remember. Clyde's men come in pairs. The first pair moves up the main street with a confidence that suggests they don't think Paul is actually as dangerous as the evidence suggests. This is the fatal miscalculation that runs through this entire story like a red thread. Everyone in Denton has underestimated Paul because he didn't want to be what he is. They read restraint as limitation. They read patience as fear. They saw a man who walked away and assumed he couldn't come back. Paul picks his moments, uses the dark, uses the rifle, uses whatever is available in the physical world of the moment. One pair becomes a problem that resolves. Then the next pair comes. Here is something true about conflict that the movies usually obscure. Even for men who are very good at it, it is not clean, it is not surgical. Things go wrong. Angles close unexpectedly. Plans collapse against the reality of other people making their own desperate choices. Paul is not invincible. He is skilled and determined and running on something colder than adrenaline, the specific fuel of a man who has already paid the price and is now collecting. But he bleeds again. He takes a hit he didn't plan for. He adjusts. This is the part of the story where lesser narratives would go glossy, would turn Paul into something superhuman, would drain the fear out of his eyes and replace it with cool cinematic swagger. But In the Valley of Violence is smarter than that. Paul is afraid. He is in pain. He is not doing this because it feels good or because he enjoys it. He is doing this because the alternative, the version of this night where he walks away and Abby's death means nothing and Gilly faces no consequence for what he is a version of the world he cannot make himself inhabit. Some things have to be answered. That's not bloodlust. That's an older kind of moral accounting. Gilly, meanwhile, is not where you'd expect him to be. The interesting thing about men who have spent their entire lives insulated from consequence is that when consequence finally arrives, when it's real and loud and happening outside their window, they discover something about themselves that the insulation was always protecting them from knowing. Gilly is not what he thought he was. He is fast and loud and capable of cruelty against those weaker than him, and he is absolutely none of those things tonight. He is hiding. His father, to his credit, in the terrible way that credits work in stories like this, is not hiding. Clyde stands in his home and waits, because he built something in this desert, and he is not capable of the kind of retreat that would require him to admit he cannot protect it. His pride is the structural beam of everything he's constructed. Remove it, and everything falls. Paul comes for him eventually. The conversation between them, brief and heavy, does something the action beats cannot. It names what this is actually about. Clyde, in his particular form of self-awareness, understands that this outcome was authored by his son, that the thing Gilly threw away carelessly, his cruelty to a stranger's dog, his refusal to let a man walk out of town in peace, has cost them everything. He says something to Paul, not a plea, not an excuse, something closer to an acknowledgement. Paul listens. Then Paul does what Paul came to do. Gilly finally surfaces, not out of bravery, out of the specific terror of a man who realizes that the hiding has to end, that whatever is coming will find him regardless, and that the waiting might be worse than the thing itself. He comes out armed and loud, the way frightened people sometimes come out, trying to reconstruct through noise the confidence that fear has taken from them. Paul is waiting. This is the confrontation the whole story has been building toward, and the movie is wise enough to make it human rather than mythic. Two men in a dying desert town in the dark, one of them stupid and scared and dangerous in that specific combination, one of them tired and hurt and completely certain about what has to happen next. Gilly fires first. Paul is faster, not by a movie margin, by the margin of someone who has been doing this longer and with more at stake. Gilly goes down in the dust of the street he used to own, in the town his father built for him, at the end of a chain of consequences that started when he grabbed a dog that wasn't his. The street goes quiet. The desert doesn't care about any of it. It was always going to be here after, unimpressed and wide and patient. That's the desert's whole character. It waits everything out. Morning comes again. Denton is different in the morning light. Not smaller exactly, but diminished somehow the way places feel when the source of their particular energy has been removed. Clyde's authority, Gilly's noise, the weight of that family's grip on the street, all of it gone or broken, or simply over in the way that irreversible things are over. Paul is still here. He shouldn't be, by any reasonable accounting. He took too many hits, bled too much, pushed through the kind of night that ends people with less reason to finish it. But he's still here, standing in the early light, and the town around him is figuring out what it is without the Clyde family defining it. Ernest comes out of the saloon, looks at the street, looks at Paul, doesn't say much, which is the right call. He goes back inside and starts making breakfast. Mason the priest appears. There's something almost liturgical about the way he moves through the aftermath, not looking away, not performing distress, just bearing witness the way men of that particular vocation are supposed to do. He asks Paul what he does now. Mexico, he says. Still going south, the plan hasn't changed, just everything that preceded it. Mason nods. There's a question Mason doesn't ask, but that hangs between them anyway. The question about whether Paul feels anything resembling what most people would call resolution, satisfaction, the closure that revenge is supposed to deliver according to the stories people tell about it. The honest answer, if Paul were to give one, is that Abby is still gone. The men who took her are gone too, but that's not the same as having her back. Revenge is not restoration. It is a different thing entirely, an insistence that what happened mattered. that the world must register the taking of something precious, even if the registration changes nothing about the loss itself. This is what this story is actually about, and it's worth sitting with. There's a woman named Ellen Gilly's fiancé, as it happens, who has been present in Denton through all of this, moving carefully through the margins of the story. She is neither complicit in what Gilly did, nor entirely apart from it, in the way people who love the wrong people are rarely entirely apart from what those people do. She has watched this week unfold with the expression of someone who has been preparing for a reckoning they suspected was coming but couldn't prevent. She looks at Paul with something that's not quite accusation and not quite gratitude. It's more complex than either. It's the look of someone who has survived a situation they didn't create and are now standing in the wreckage of other people's choices, wondering what gets built next. Paul doesn't have anything reassuring to offer her. He doesn't try. Tubby the marshal. He is alive. He made his choice in the night, the choice that cost him something, and he is standing with it in the morning. What exactly Tubby did when the moment came, what form his remaining conscience took when pressed to act, is something the movie handles with restraint. He stands in his office with his badge and whatever he's decided to do with what's left of his authority in a town that is going to need to figure out what authority means now. He nods at Paul when Paul passes. Paul nods back. No warmth, no animosity. Just two men who understand something about each other that cannot be easily articulated and doesn't need to be. Paul leaves Denton walking south. No horse, because he was never a man of significant resources, just boots and a rifle and a road, and the memory of a dog padding beside him that will not leave him alone for a very long time, if ever. The desert opens up around him the same way it always does, vast and uncaring and magnificent in that specific way, that things are magnificent when they are older than everything and will outlast everything. You watch him walk and you understand without being told that Mexico is still the destination. Whatever is there, whoever is there, or whatever version of himself he is trying to find it, remains the direction. The detour through Denton has cost him time, blood, and the one companion who made the journey bearable, but the direction is the same. The road doesn't promise anything, it just leads somewhere. And for a man like Paul, somewhere has always been enough to keep moving. Here's what I want you to take from this story, because there is something here beyond the dust and the gunfire and the man and his dog. In the Valley of Violence is a movie about proportionality and consequence in a world that has none. Gilly could not see Paul's value because Gilly had been raised in a world where only certain people and things have designated worth that his family assigned and could revoke. The dog was, to Gilly, nothing. A prop, a thing to take because he was petty and bored and small. The idea that someone like Paul, someone who arrived with nothing visible, without money or name or social position in Denton, could have something so valuable that taking it would cost everything, was genuinely unthinkable to him. This is not just a Western, it's a portrait of the violence that comes from underestimating what matters to people outside your own social framework. And Paul himself, he's not a hero in the clean sense. He kills people, some of whom were probably just scared and poor and working for the wrong employer. The movie doesn't ask you to celebrate him uncritically. It asks you to understand him, to follow the logic of his grief from its quiet beginning to its violent end, and recognize that the logic is, if not right, at least coherent, at least human. Abby mattered to him. She mattered the way things matter when everything else has been stripped away completely, without irony, without complication. She was his person, in a world that had taken from Paul many times before, in ways we only partially see. She was what remained. They killed her. They regretted it. Not because Paul was invincible, because love, even the quiet, uncomplicated love between a man and his dog, is worth more than most people with power ever bothered to calculate until the bill arrives. The desert stretches south. Paul walks. The morning is quiet. Abby is gone, and that is permanent, and nothing that happened in Denton changes that. But something else is permanent too, the fact that her life meant enough for a man to walk back into a town that had already beaten him once, to face whatever came, to insist to the wide and indifferent sky that she counted. She counted. The road keeps going. The story is over. So Paul walked into that town with a dog and a direction, and left with only the direction. Everything else, the blood, the men, the town, the whole terrible chain of it, stays behind him in the dust. What's the one moment in this story that hit different for you? Was it when Gilly took her, or when Paul decided to walk back in? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if this kind of storytelling is what you come here for, the kind that doesn't look away from the hard parts, then the subscribe button is right there. It's free, it takes 2 seconds. And it means the next story finds you instead of passing you by.